Alright, RPG Maker tier list time, let's go. Yume Nikki is a hard game to approach because there's so much video game essays, there's so much stuff out there, this thing has been dissected to hell and back, what could I possibly say about it? I love how it's so comfortable with not giving anyone any answers. The game is so old, but it was so ahead of its time as far as vague storytelling. It's hard to play it without feeling ridiculously uncomfortable. There's a ton of stuff you could extrapolate from it. You could almost make your own story with it, but it gives you enough pieces that it really does point you in a direction. It's hard to give this anything but an S tier. Space Funeral. Space Funeral is an odd one. I talked to the creator, he's a nice dude. He said he didn't want to say anything extravagant with the game. It wasn't meant to, shine a light on the human condition or anything like that. It was just him making a story as he went along. It's a sci-fi story where you play as some guy named Philip, you get kicked out of your parents' house, you go on an adventure through this planet. At the end of the game, you find out that you fix the world and everything is just default RPG Maker assets, which is kind of cool. I thought that might say something about like human art or whatever, but no, it's not about anything. I think combat-wise and everything like that, it's serviceable, much more serviceable than most RPG Maker games, but at the end of the day, I'd be reluctant to call this one a masterpiece. Maybe more of a little hidden gem. I think I'd be comfortable putting it in B. Now, some of you watching are going, oh, this isn't an RPG Maker game. Okay. To that I would say... Now, Undertale used meme culture stuff in its dialogue long before every single game was talking in Zoomer speak, and for that, it has a special place in my heart. It really had its own unique feel. It has an X factor to its atmosphere that's really hard to, put your finger on. I've seen other games try and replicate this, like Everhood, and I think Everhood is a good game, but I don't think any game has ever really come close to Undertale and Deltarune as far as atmosphere and storytelling for its own specific style. Toby Fox has this unique ability to take really common fairy tale tropes or fictional tropes like skeletons and mages and stuff and really just have his own spin on them. And then when the entire world convinces you that it's this happy-go-lucky monsters and humans holding hands thing, it'll hit you with some of the lore and it'll break your heart in half and it'll put it back together and then do it all over again. It's just a really great piece of storytelling, so it's hard for me to put this anywhere in S, even if it's not made in RPG Maker. Right. Undertale Yellow pretty much did everything the original Undertale managed to do, but with more than a decade of hindsight was able to improve on the combat, improve on pretty much everything. These guys had Toby Fox's style so down to a T that they were able to make their own thing with it, and they did an absolutely amazing job. I've only played the pacifist route so far, and even though I've been spoiled on some things, I look forward to eventually revisiting it and maybe doing a video on one of the other routes, but no, Undertale Yellow is simply fantastic. I love Martlet, Soroba at times, I like her too, though I think there's issues with the story pacing when it comes to Soroba, which I've talked about. Honestly, maybe it seems like I'm being too generous in this video so far, but I am reluctant to not put this in S, because that's just what it is. Lisa the Painful is interesting in that it has that Disco Elysium thing where it can switch from comedic to heart-wrenching in less than a blink, and it won't even feel unnatural. What's interesting about Lisa the Painful is it has this philosophy of not only is the world miserable, but it'll lure you into thinking you have a stable rock to lean on and then pull that rock out from under you. For example, there's a moment where you find this guy's brother, I think, and you can return him to his brother, but when you do, the guy's like, oh, you don't want payment or anything? Okay, I guess. Thanks, or whatever. And most games would give you a pat on the back for doing the right thing there, but in the world of Lisa the Painful, it's just kind of okay, thanks, I guess. And also it explores a really depressing topic in failed redemption arcs. So maybe the character did some bad stuff and they're trying to, move on from that, but at the end they fail, and it's just awful to see. It's a death at a funeral situation, really. I think Lisa the Painful is brilliant. Even in the gameplay front, I think it's brilliant. It's not revolutionary or anything, but as far as RPG Maker games, it's a cut above the rest. It's going to be another S tier. Lisa the Hopeful is a pretty good adaptation of Dingaling's source material. It follows 3 guys, maybe 4 guys, depending on the route you take. They go through the desert countryside like you would imagine most Lisa stories to go. It's a fan work, obviously. We get interesting insights into the main characters, like traumas and stuff, but they don't explore them so deeply that the mystery is left untapped. Like, we know the main character has some sort of past guilt with this girl, and it's affecting his actions in the present. Basic storytelling 101 stuff, but you'd be surprised how many games don't follow through with that kind of stuff. Gameplay-wise, I often found myself in a situation that was so hard I had to abuse joy to get through the game. I imagine better players will hear that and scoff, but I think overall it was a pretty solid game, a good adaptation of Lisa's source material, and I think I'm going to put it in B. Oh yeah, we're on Omori, aren't we? So there's a subsection of people online who have made it a good chunk of their personality to just trash Omori. I don't understand. I don't like the game off particularly much, but I didn't make it my full-time job. I think it's fine if someone doesn't like Omori, but I think that when you put Omori under a microscope, it really is that deep. There's just so much, like, for example, the pinwheels in the background representing the characters moving on from Mari's death, stuff like that. Stuff like that is the norm, not the exception in Omori. It really is everywhere. The rug pull, which I thankfully didn't have spoiled for me, the plot twists, where you finally learn what happens and you finally realize why Basil is so scared of Sunny. All of it just comes together, and anyone who is trying to run from a past that they feel like is always behind them can extrapolate meaning and love from Omori. I think for people who have a guilty conscience, Omori is a very therapeutic game. Even if you're like me, even if your own story isn't as interesting as Sunny's, even if you haven't done something as bad as Sunny, you can still pull from his story and feel much better. Gameplay-wise, the emotion system is interesting, but I understand there's a lot of problems with it. Still, overall, it's just an incredible time. One of my favorite games, perhaps even my favorite game. I'm not sure. I'm still deciding that. It gets an S. Instars and Time. Instars and Time has ludicrous pacing problems, and if you're not really like, how should I put this? If you're not very current as far as language, lots of it might seem alien to you, because it is, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but it is very Zoomer coded, like the way the term apology tour is used at one point in Instars and Time. Even if the pacing has huge problems, I did come to love Sifrin, I did come to love his friends, their struggles, learning all about them was a lot of fun. Their little exchanges as they go in different rooms in the castle all kind of coalesced into this whole party that I really cared for. And without spoiling anything, the ending was really something that I just actually loved and don't see often from RPG Maker games. Like, it actually felt very good in the truest sense of that word. Combat-wise, it has this cute rock, paper, scissors thing going on, which is okay at best, but again, still a cut above most RPG Maker games. Yeah. I think that I know it has the physical release coming out soon or whatever. But yeah, overall, Instars and Time is a nice feel-good story with some really dark trenches, and once you get through those dark trenches, it just becomes that much better, because you realize not everything needs to end on such a bitter note. Sometimes stories can just be feel-good, sometimes they can just have happy endings, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just because your game is made in RPG Maker doesn't mean the ending has to be the saddest thing ever concocted. I'm gonna go ahead and give it One Shot is probably the game people would say my channel is about, even though One Shot is probably the game people would say my channel is centered around, even though if Omori wasn't a thing. If Omori wasn't a thing, people would say I was a One Shot channel. And I don't blame them for that. I've made a lot of videos about One Shot. I really like it. It's lots of things. A lot of the emotional weight in the story comes down to one pivotal choice, and it's a simple one. A lot of games have done it. It's not anything necessarily new or original, but I do think it's very effective in what it does. I think the world building is really cool. A lot of the worlds seem like they're very tailored around the sun, or it seems like there's a missing ingredient in each biome you go to, and I think that's because the sun is gone or whatever, and obviously that's very intentional. But overall, I do think that One Shot is a very good game. Gameplay wise, it's going to be your kind of adventure game kind of thing, where you're finding items and mixing them, trying to find a way forward. Maybe you don't know how to get through the desert area or how to get through the jungle area, and you're just trying to find throwing every item at the wall, trying to see what to do. That can be annoying when you get lost, but even putting that aside, I do think it's worth playing the game or looking it up on YouTube just because it is a very good story. There is something funny in that the 2014 version of the game would delete your save and not let you continue under certain conditions. So that was why it was called One Shot. And then in the retail release of the game, they were like, oh wait, we don't want people to buy a game and then they can't play it anymore. So the name One Shot kind of became obsolete in its own story, which I think kind of docks points against it, but even with that in mind, I still think One Shot is not a classic, but probably one of the greats at the very least. I'm going to go ahead and put it in A. Oh god, Off. If Kenway was here, he'd be roasting this too. Off is not so much a game for humans as it is a game for computers. The puzzles are so goddamn hard that you have a better chance of deciphering the Zodiac Killer's messages before solving some of the puzzles in this game. The battle system is very rudimentary. It's just going to be a test of your patience, if nothing else. You're going to be going through these environments, fighting random things, and every single time you encounter an enemy, your heart is going to sink because you know it's going to be the most boring, dragged out thing ever. It can get really, really bad. And the only thing that is a break from those fights is the puzzles, which are just so obtuse you would need to take notes to be able to get through the game. The story itself is kind of interesting. You play as this guy named the Batter who goes world to world, kind of purging things of their evilness, for lack of a better term. But if you revisit worlds that you purged, you'll see that the worlds are black and white and kind of lifeless, which lends some skepticism to, oh, is he actually purging these worlds for the better, or is he just taking everything out of these worlds that makes them what they are? There's a plot twist towards the end I kind of liked. As a story, it's pretty competent. I'd be remiss not to talk about the soundtrack. Pepper Steak is one of the best songs I've ever heard in an RPG Maker game, one of the best battle themes I've ever heard. The soundtrack does a great job of just being the audio version of the atmosphere. It feels like, even just listening to it, you feel like you're a dehydrated person in the desert, just like your thoughts are slowly leaving you and you're just seeing hallucinations. It really does a good job of selling the atmosphere, and I think that's commendable. But overall, just because of the game, because of the obtuse puzzles and stuff, I really just couldn't get into this as much as other people did. Story is pretty solid, but not solid enough that I would put up with the puzzles and the battle system. I'm gonna have to give it a C. Fear and Hunger is unique in that it actually has gameplay value. It's like a roguelite. You can replay it and things will be spawned in different places. You can do different builds. You can play different characters. You can find different secrets. It is really, really scary and just sad. The soundtrack is non-existent for the battles. The battles just let you sit with the silence of you and the monster. But going back to what I said at the beginning of this yap, the replayability is a huge part of Fear and Hunger and why a lot of people come back to it. The story and lore itself is interesting, don't get me wrong, but I think for the most part people like the gameplay. People like discovering the secrets and slowly getting better at it. I haven't played the sequel, though I've heard that one's also good, though I probably prefer the medieval setting of the first game as opposed to the Bloodborne-inspired second one. Still, Fear and Hunger is very good. I'm going to go ahead and put it in A. End Roll is interesting in that it crawled so that Omori could run, kind of. So it came out before Omori, yet has a lot of the same storytelling techniques, but told with zero subtlety. When I first played it, I thought that it was like a derivative of Omori, but it turns out it came out before it. So the whole game alludes to some tragic event that happened at the zoo, and there's actually an enemy you can fight that's just called a zoo ticket, and it's just a giant zoo ticket. And I saw that and I'm like, this is like Omori if there was just no subtlety. It's just, this is what happened, this is what we're gonna do. Harambe RPG. Someone in chat just said Harambe RPG. That is terrible and also true at the same time. I do think a tragic event happening at the zoo is pretty fertile grounds for interesting storytelling. Like, not only did something accidental and awful happen, but like just an animal could have shredded like a kid to pieces or whatever. We hear about how much testosterone those apes have, and I think it being centered around an event that took place at the zoo is a pretty interesting idea, and I appreciate all of the inspiration that it provided for Omori it crawled so that Omori could run, like I said. But it's so haphazard in its execution that it's hard to label it a classic necessarily, or even an A rank. I think I would be very content putting this in B. Witch's House had all of the odds going against it. So when you're playing a horror game and your goal is to like scare the viewer, it can be hard to do that with just a top-down RPG Maker thing. Like, it's not third person, it's not even first person. You're not right in the face of the monsters. It can be hard to get the user scared in that format, but Witch's House does a lot of clever things to actually scare the viewer and kind of keep them on their toes. In the remaster or whatever, at least the checkpoints aren't so annoying as to set you back really far and make you pissed off at what just happened. I really enjoyed my time with the Witch's House. It definitely deserves its own video at one point. The scene with the frog in particular I thought was really cruel, but also just really effective storytelling. I think I have to put the Witch's House in B. The Coffin of Andy and Layla is a game that is universally loved online and has not divided anyone. In all seriousness, I think that the controversy surrounding this game is unfortunate because I think once you kind of weed past the brain rot, there is some really great storytelling here. There's layers to each character. Andy and Layla enable each other in different ways. They're both kind of they're each other's worst enemy without even knowing it, and one of them is a doormat that lets Ashley do whatever. The other one is just constantly trying to manipulate and control the other. I hadn't seen layered storytelling like this since the likes of Disco Elysium and stuff like that. I know I come back to Disco Elysium a lot, but it is kind of the beacon of what I consider peak writing. But yeah, no, kind of to reiterate on what I said earlier, the controversy kind of just gets in the way of talking about a game that I think has really solid writing, and if you want proof that the game has solid writing, you can look to the other titles this person has made that aren't as controversial, and I think you'll enjoy the writing there, so you know the person is at least competent. But overall, I think even though the gameplay has no combat and it's really just a matter of find the object to progress, I think the Coffin of Andy and Layla has a lot to say about just kind of... I think the Coffin of Andy and Layla has a lot to say about broken homes and just environments that aren't ideal for a kid to grow up in. The mom doesn't care about what's happening, the dad doesn't care about what's happening, and the only form of truth that these characters were able to come to terms with was their own abusive relationship and enabling relationship between each other. It also doesn't hurt that both the main characters are really hot. I feel like if these were both fat Alabama people, it would not have the same effect, which isn't exactly it's not exactly a very piercing and informative insight there. But yeah, no, I think this game had everything working against it. But once you weed past the online discourse and just look at the game for what it is, I think it really is very good. But the gameplay has me hesitant to put it too high on the tier list. So where do we put it? Because the letter I is not on this tier list, so I can't put it there. Go ahead and put it in A. Even though it's not finished yet, I have faith that the future 2 chapters will be as good or on par with the previous chapters.